Hold me closer, Ed. It's getting dark. Tell Annie M to let old Yeller out.
Tell Tawny Tim I won't be coming home this Christmas. Tell Scarlett I do give a damn. Pardon me.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And this week we're talking about The Mask from 1994. It's the 30th anniversary of this movie this year.
Not quite a forgotten film that people have stopped talking about, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe not.
It's hard to say. It certainly was a success in its day.
It was at the time, yeah. Let's pause the podcast on this one. I don't think you need to... I think we're going to spoil it, but there's not really...
There's one plot twist,
Look,
which I found, as a child, watching this, an enormous betrayal.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Staggering. As a callow youth that had no film savvy, no understanding of tropes, no understanding of why Cameron Diaz might get more screen time than the other prominent female character in the film.
Okay, I see.
But that's really the only spoilable moment, so I would say don't pause the podcast.
All right. Okay, so The Mask started in 1991. There were...
I thought it was 1989.
Okay.
I don't even know. Does it matter? I mean...
My understanding is that the three series came out between 91 and 95. There were three miniseries. Now, creation of The Mask goes back much earlier.
It does indeed.
To 89.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Dark Horse Presents, there was a version of The Mask that appeared in Dark Horse Presents, I believe.
That might have been
89.
Yes, that might be the one I'm thinking.
And then kind of the concept got revised a few times.
Yes. So the iteration of The Mask that we read this week was not the original
That's right.
iteration.
Yeah.
There was a 10-issue run by Mark Badger.
Right, okay.
Where he wrote it Mask, M-A-S-Q-U-E.
That's right.
And it was far more mythological.
Okay.
It was about a South American priest.
Okay.
That travelled to North America and dragged with him some of the mystique and mystery of his home country.
Okay.
And as he encountered situations, social injustices, part of, I guess, the magical realism of the South American milieu manifested itself around him, warping the surroundings into a nightmarish encounter. It sounds very avant-garde. I would have liked to have read it before I came, but I ran out of time.
Okay.
Anyway, that version of the character survives a tiny bit, but instead of the Mask character in warping their surroundings, the later writers decided to invert it.
Yeah.
The Mask character would instead have that reality manipulation power, but he would be centered on himself. He could produce magical items. He could resist damage.
Yeah.
He was kind of like a nightmare made flesh.
Yes. So the later writers were mostly John Arcudi at the stage, very early in his career, and the artist was Doug Mahnke. Very early Doug Mahnke. Now, I would say now he's become one of the best artists in the biz. He's done a lot of, especially Justice League kind of stuff at DC. He has a very highly detailed style. When we start out in the first series, he's a real newcomer.
Right.
But by the second series, The Mask Returns, he's already, you can see issue by issue, he's getting better and better. He's taking on a kind of Jeff Darrow style with a lot of lines on things, and even anytime you have a car crash or stuff, like bits are flying everywhere. That kind of
it's very detailed.
It's super detailed.
Yes.
But it's not quite at that. But by the second series, in the first series, it's still kind of, he's still finding his feet, it seems like.
Sure.
So it was actually created by Mike Richardson,
who we have mentioned before on the podcast.
And apparently redesigned by Chris Warner, who we've mentioned on the podcast, because I think there must have been something in Time Cop. Maybe he was an artist on there. I can't remember.
But yes, that's both correct. I read, yes, absolutely. I think Chris Warner drew the original, I guess, treatment. of the zoot suit wearing mask, broad shoulders, tapering body, which kind of is now iconic, including with the Jim Carrey version of the character.
Yeah. So, right from page 1, we get this guy named Stanley Imkus. He was in a...
curio shop, I suppose.
Yes, curio shop. A bit like... I want to say like Gremlins, but it's not like a spooky Chinatown shop. It's just like a shop. And he buys this mask. We don't know...
No, it's a bit more uptown than the Chinese shop.
Yeah, uptown, that's what I'm saying, yeah. And we don't know quite why he's buying this mask. As he leaves the shop... there are some bikers who drive through a puddle and splash his newly cleaned car.
Yeah.
And he fantasizes about beating them up in some, like, thought balloon panel.
Well, first he
badmouths them and then they beat him up.
But he badmouths them, they come back and beat him up.
Yeah.
And then he has those fantasies about beating them up in return. But it's all of this is establishing that he's a total nebbish.
Yes.
A weak, kind of a put-upon, weak-willed fellow.
Yeah.
He, even when the guys splash his car as they drive past the first time, he swears at them, but then he thinks to himself, oh, I shouldn't have brought it out right after a washer anyway, so it's really my fault. It's like, oh, come on.
Right.
You loser.
Right.
But, I mean, we're really getting the message here. This is a loser with fantasies of retribution.
Yes. So he gets home with the mask. He's got a girlfriend at home, this
Cathey.
kind of blonde. She's beautiful. Later on, some mechanics describe them as the bald guy that came in with the hot girlfriend.
Yeah.
We don't know quite how this relationship is working. She describes him as moody, which is maybe important. The mask, in one moment, in one panel, seems to talk to him. Like it says something to him. He's like, what? And he's
that
like,
never comes up again.
He just writes it off. Yeah, it doesn't come up
Early
again,
days.
sort of. But he sets it aside. It was supposed to be a gift for her to kind of... guess the things are a bit rough at the moment. He's trying to patch things over, and she collects these kinds of curios, so he thought she might like it. That night, he gets up from bed, and he goes to go to the toilet, and he finds the mask is sitting on the toilet seat. And he figures she must have put it in there for whatever reason, because she was like, you can't win my heart with a present. Like, that's not going to do the trick. So he's like, oh, maybe she's pulling some prank on me. He says, I'll scare her. I'll put the mask on and go in. He puts the mask on and he transforms into this weird guy with a big green head.
It's just his head that transforms.
Just his head.
The rest of his body seems to stay the same. He's still wearing the same clothes, but his head has become larger, bright green, big white teeth, enormous bulbous eyes.
Yeah.
Looks crazy.
Yes, and everything now operates according to cartoon logic. Really Looney Tunes kind of logic. He can produce, what do we call those hammers? Interdimensional hammers?
From Hammerspace. He can bring stuff from Hammerspace.
Yeah.
I don't think... It is cartoony or comic. I mean, the cartoon association really becomes explicit in the film. But here, I think it's less explicit. He just seems to be able... He can... survive any damage. Yeah. And it's very bloody.
But he can transform him. So he can transform his suits like he has like a carnival suit at one time where he does the balloon animals and stuff.
He can change his outfit. He can hide his big green head under a flesh mask.
Yes.
It's always a flesh mask. He never transforms per se. Because they're going for kind of... it's grotesque.
Yeah.
There's a lot of grotesquerie, a lot of violence, a lot of blood. The character, he's called Big Head in the comic.
That's what the police call him.
That's what the police call him, yeah.
He's not the gangsters.
He's not called the Mask, he's called Big Head, or the Big Head Killer. Often he'll have a big hole in his chest from where someone's shot him. He's constantly being shot. He can't be killed with guns. He can't die. He's indestructible. He will often be pulling guns out of nowhere.
Yep.
And he will perform vicious kinds of acts of violence on people that get in his way. Yes. Or have tormented the mask wearer. It's a bit unclear whether the mask and the wearer are separate.
Well, we'll get to that. We're jumping a little bit ahead.
Sure,
so he's put the mask on. Now we've got the kind of, I think it's cartoony logic, but he decides he feels powerful and he's going to try it out. So he goes out the window and he goes down a drain pipe down onto the street, and there's some toughs on the street that he has a tussle with. and I don't remember what he did to these guys. But he starts... Does he go after the bikers at this stage, or is that later? I think he finds the bikers at some stage. He murders them.
This first night, he realizes the extent of the abilities that the mask possesses.
Yes, because somebody tries to kill him, and he realizes he can't be killed. And he says, I'm going to share my powers with mankind.
Yeah, I will be a superhero.
Yes.
I will start being a superhero tomorrow.
Yes.
Is what he says. But first,
I'm going to get revenge on those bikers or whatever.
Not just the bikers. He has a list.
Well, this is after the first night. So he comes home, and Cathey, right, finds him sitting in front of the TV wearing this camo outfit, and he's writing up shit list of all these people that he's going to get revenge on.
Yeah, there's been a time skip here.
Yeah.
He comes home, they sort of have a conversation, and then we get a time skip. And the mask he's been using the mask in the intervening period, and it's like the One Ring, right?
Yeah.
It's having some kind of negative effect on him.
He's become, without the mask on, he's become a much meaner guy.
Yeah.
We know he was moody before, and now he almost slaps her. There's a moment where
he's wearing camo gear. He's got guns and ammo magazines that he's suddenly he's turning into a Make America Great Again kind of character in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
It's funny. The more things change. And he's watching the news a lot. I don't know why the news... It's a bit like Death. Maybe it's like Death.
It is very... We've got the magic...
Get this out the way.
We've got the magic corrupting object. I thought we were out of Death Note territory.
No, not at all.
Not at all. We've got the magic corrupting object. He's watching the news. He's going to get revenge on all these people because now he has this power.
But this is a much more traditional story about the object that gives you unasked for abilities, but that cause you kind of like harm your soul.
Yes.
Even as you're satisfying your id. Which I actually think is mostly missing from Death Note, the manga.
Right.
It's something that they brought in the two Japanese films we watched, and especially in last week's episode, where it was very much a cursed object, a millstone about the neck of poor old...
Light Turner.
Well, he was concerning himself often with getting rid of the Death Note, and that eventually is what, although not with Stanley Ipkiss, but that's eventually with what owners of the mask eventually become obsessed with.
Yeah.
How to divest themselves of this thing which is so tempting but inevitably ruins your life.
Yeah. So he goes after the people on his list, including these mechanics that ripped him off fixing his car.
Yep.
He goes after his old school teacher.
Yeah, it's pretty clear then that he's evil.
Oh yeah, he murders the school teacher in front of the class.
In front of the children.
And the kids run out screaming.
Yeah.
The mechanics, one of them, we see the results after the murder, which he's shoved a muffler into the guy's face so that his face is shaped like muffler.
Like a muffler,
yeah.
That's kind of cartoony.
And he folds the balloon up into a Tommy gun. As I mentioned, he actually mows down all these.
Yep.
I think that must have been the bikers.
Yes. Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah. So he's behaving badly every time he comes home. He's getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
Cathey throws him out. He decides he's going to break back in because he wants
the mask. Back, yeah.
He wants the mask. He thinks she threw it out. She threw it in the garbage, and he thinks she's lied about it or something. She's keeping it for herself, and of course he's gone wacko.
Yeah.
So he tries to climb in. She phones the police because somebody's broken in. But by the time the cops show up, he gets the mask, or she throws him in. Once she realizes it's him, not a random burglar, she tries to protect him.
Yeah.
He ends up with a mask again, and then he ends up mowing down the police.
Yep.
There's a specific moment here where he jumps out the window, and he's about to hit the top of the police car, and he goes into a screech, like a cartoon screech, to stop himself in midair, like Bugs Bunny would.
Yeah.
And that was a moment specifically I was like, oh, maybe this would work better in animation if that's specifically what they're going for.
It's perfect for animation. And in fact, eventually there would be a mask animated series which we can return to.
That's true. So he gets he uses a cop car as a getaway car. There's a guy they've arrested in the back that's forced on this ride along this crazy car chase. There's one crazy scene where he comes up to a cop and puts his gun down the cop's pants and shoots him.
This is the one that's just on that's just on guard duty out the front of his girlfriend's building.
Yeah.
Shoots his dick off.
Yeah.
I assume because he was staking out his girlfriend's... Is it even that logical?
Don't even remember.
There doesn't seem to be a good reason why he killed...
He just
because
does
he's a piece of shit that kills cops.
Yes. So at this stage, pretty early on, like page 54, somehow Cathey gets a hold of the mask. I think he comes home and takes off the mask. I can't remember why. And
People always feel compelled to take off the mask. I don't know why.
And she puts it on, and she kills him.
Yes.
Stanley Ipkiss is dead on page 54. Let me point this out. And it seems like Cathey is now going to be the owner of the mask, but she's actually pretty smart about it, and she's like, no.
Well, is she that smart about it? Because instead of... So
she's smart about taking it off.
She doesn't want anything to do with it. We only see her wearing it for a single panel.
Yes, that's right.
And she doesn't want anything to do with it. So, and then she does something super dumb, is that she goes to the cops, and she goes to the police officer that was investigating...
Yes, Lieutenant Calloway.
Lieutenant Calloway. And she gives him the mask.
Yeah.
And says, here's your culprit.
Yeah.
Here's your suspect. Okay. No, that doesn't make sense. In any milieu, you can't give someone a mask and say, here it is, governor. Here's the crime solved. This is an extremely dangerous object. Cathey knows that. And her solution is to give it to...
She doesn't want anything to do with it. She thinks the cops are trustworthy.
So dig a hole. Yeah, maybe she's naive. Although she didn't seem naive because she was defending... She defended Stanley when the cops came.
Yes. Well, she starts to figure out... She starts to figure out when Calloway starts using it, right.
Well, but maybe she thinks... I don't know. Does she know Calloway? This bugged me. I'm like, you don't. The last person you give it to is the cops.
No, I don't know. Maybe she should have buried it, knowing that it was a mystical object that the cops wouldn't believe anyway.
Don't use it. She'd only used it the one time, but maybe she.
I think it's tempting, though.
Yeah. Well, it comes to that. So she gives it to Calloway.
Yeah. Explains
that it caused all the trouble if you put it on. Calloway instantly tries to put it on, and she tells him, "No, you must never put it on."
Yeah.
Okay. Don't do this cool thing, Calloway.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So, and of course, that's the first thing he does when he gets home. He puts it on, and then
I can't remember why he puts it on, though. Exactly.
He puts it on for fun.
Yeah. But by the way, this is the second series, so the first series ends with the death of Stanley. So we're in... Oh, no, it's only issue 2. That's right. Okay, it's
still
only
the first run.
Issue 3, right.
So, it's much like Light Yagami in the Japanese movies, in that Calloway is a virtuous person who is jaded and frustrated at the limitations of the system in which he is required to work.
I would say he's a little bit jaded, and he gets more and more the more he uses the mask.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because there's the comparison between the gratification, the rush that he gets from doing vigilante justice while wearing the mask, and having to deal in the day with bureaucracy, with politics, with a boss that doesn't like him, with him being taken off certain cases, etc., etc. In the evenings, he can put on the mask, he's imbued with otherworldly power, and he goes out and rights all those wrongs. The suspect that got away because of a lack of evidence, or because evidence was stolen from the lockup.
So there's a kind of shift in story here. It becomes more of a procedural.
Yes, but
we've got this drug dealer named Rapaz who becomes a major figure, and there's this kind of rival gang stuff going on. We've got this big enforcer named Walter, who is this huge hulking guy with a disfigured face, which we learn later on. Like, he's got all these scars that he actually does that himself just for kicks.
He's the Terminator, basically.
Yes, he is a...
he's a fun character, Walter. It's a shame he didn't make it into the movie.
This is a character that Garth Ennis has ripped off, I'd say, 7 times. He's had these kind of giant mob of forces that are just that just love pain and are unkillable, that just keep coming back.
Is this the first?
Super violent.
Walter is a pretty rad character, I must say. I liked him. He's barely in this first. He comes back in the Mask Returns, and he has a much more prominent role.
Yeah.
And his art improves.
Yeah.
But here in the first round, he's just sort of barely in it.
So...
But he's a match even for a reality warping...
Yes. The only match, it's an interesting thing. It's a bit like... The Punisher, there are no recurring villains almost, right? Rapaz gets killed pretty quickly.
Yes.
And then there's like somebody had witnessed the Mask killing Rapaz, and
also, Calloway's very concerned about this. I don't know why, because he's wearing a green mask and is a
well, they think the mass
like
killings have stopped. This is the whole narrative that he's constructed, is that the mass killings have stopped, but now he's been seen as the mask. I can't quite remember how
it's a bit rough.
It went together.
I mean, the point is that the mask grants your desires in a horrible way.
Yeah.
That fucks you over.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, it's the corruptive object.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the Ring of Sauron.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings.
So now this witness wants to talk to the police, so he goes there as a mask and scares the witness to stop him from confessing to.
Why not just kill him? I don't know.
Maybe that he did at this point was still able to distinguish an innocent witness from the criminal.
That's another thing. You're right, of course, because it eventually becomes clear that you can either give yourself over to the mask, and it makes you more powerful if you do so, or you can resist it, keep your moral compass, but you're less powerful thereby.
Yeah. So Calloway's put in charge of forming a task force to catch Big Head.
I felt Death Note
Very
vibes
Death
here.
Note-ish. Yeah. Yeah.
You heard it here, guys.
Yeah.
Death Note ripped off the mask.
Yeah. Now there's this mob dispute happening, as I mentioned. I actually quite liked all this stuff. I've read these comics before, but I'd forgotten this. I found this stuff was structured pretty well.
I don't agree. I was skipping over it.
This gangster orders his men to go kill this other guy at I can't remember when he says to kill him, and they say, like, when do you want us to do it? He says, do it at lunchtime. It's like he sarcastically says, do it at lunchtime. So they literally, these two idiots, go to this restaurant and kill this guy in broad daylight at lunchtime. It turns into this big kerfuffle. Meanwhile, there's this assistant DA who's corrupt and is basically helping any bad guys in town if they pay him enough.
Yeah.
And he's stolen a bunch of heroin from the evidence locker.
Yeah, he lifted the evidence from the evidence locker that meant that Rapaz walked.
Yes.
Because the evidence went missing.
And also Rapaz uses that heroin to kill people. Like, he ODs people on purpose.
Well, that's how it's not that same heroin, because the DA ends up keeping it in a safe in his office. Which is nuts. Why wouldn't you just flush it? But you're right, but Rapaz is a character in his own right. He's a serial killer, but he only kills junkies. And he only kills junkies that cross him. And how he kills them is by giving them an overdose.
Yeah.
So he's very hard to kind of nab.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a huge shootout in the restaurant at the lunchtime. The mask comes in.
Well, he's called Big Head here.
He's called Big Head, yes. But during all the shootouts, fighting and stuff, he starts... his old partner confronts him, right? And... like, says, let's have a fist fight. And the mask is beating this guy up. Big Head is beating this guy up.
Yep.
And his old partner. But he starts talking to himself. Now, the mask, when he speaks, when he has the mask on, he has this really crazed voice, like, with the lettering. But
it's a bit like the Joker.
Yes.
You know, kind of how the Joker's word balloons are written, especially...
Sometimes, yeah.
Not in... but sort of since the 80s.
Yeah.
Since, I suppose... the Dark Knight Returns.
Yes.
Or Grant Morrison's Batman story.
Right.
What was that one called?
That was Arkham...
The Arkham Asylum one?
Yeah.
Where he'll have a special word balloon with jagged letters all over the place.
Yes, like that. Like that. But the voice of Calloway is coming through in a normal speaking voice. He's like, I can't fight this guy. And he produces a bundle of TNT... or dynamite, like he's going to blow up his partner. He's like, no, I can't do it. And he runs away and lets it blow up in his own face. And Cathey's been figuring this stuff out. Like, she thinks she knows Calloway. In fact, the
whole reason she gave it to him is so that it would get locked up somewhere.
Yes. And she comes to an agreement with him that, like, you're not going to use him. Once she sees that Big Head is doing crimes again, she's like, that's Calloway.
Yeah.
And she makes him lock it into a desk drawer. And she takes the key... but then next time we see, she tries to call him and we see his empty...
he tries to call her to get her to bring the key.
Right.
And then eventually when he realises he can't get hold of her, he breaks into the desk. It's not a super secure... I would have been very sus if I was Cathey. It's like a drawer in a desk. You're pulling that out pretty easy.
Yeah. I don't know. She only had the mask on once.
So he ends up burying an axe in the desk and ripping the drawer open, putting on... That's when he goes after the DA.
Yes,
it's when he's realised the DA is corrupt. He called Cathey asking her, bring the key, I need to go after this DA.
That's right.
He's outside the law. This is a legitimate use for the mask. They sort of agreed. We'll keep it locked up until I think there's a good use for it because it's too powerful to be disposed of. They actually say that. This is too powerful to be disposed of. It's too tempting. We have to keep it here and use it when it needs to be used. But here's how we'll keep things safe, because we'll be a team. I'll give you the key, and I'll call you, and we'll decide together when it should be. But that all just goes out the window. He goes berserk when he finds out the DA is the one that stole the evidence that led to his suspect getting away and led to him being on suspension or what have you. He puts it on again. Yeah. So Cathey...
At the end, when he realizes he's almost killed his partner and his true self comes through, his Calloway's self comes through.
Oh yeah,
he goes home and she's like, she knows he's used the mask again, you know, and she's trying to confront him about it, but he's down in the basement, he's buried it under concrete.
He ends up cementing it into his basement, John Wick style.
Yeah.
It's not super clear how the mask works throughout the comic. Sometimes it seems to release your id.
Yeah.
So your own desires deeply buried. But at other times, the mask seems to have its own agenda.
Yes, and interestingly, we never get a real origin of this mask. What is it? We never know. It's like the Mogwai in Gremlins. Just no idea where this thing came from, what it is.
We get a kind of half-assed origin.
Well, we do a little bit in part 2, in The Mask Returns. We get a scene where some gangsters hired a guy to go into the jungle and steal it from this tribe. Yeah. And the tribe is using it, and it's magical. Like the head, like the shaman's head gets cut off, and he's wearing the mask, and he just picks the head up and puts it back on.
I can't make up my mind about this scene. Because, as you say, we get a firelit circle. The panel borders are jagged, which seems to indicate otherworldliness or the past or something. So we don't get straight ruled panel borders. We see that this is a departure from the standard narrative. This is either the past or a fantasy or something. Yet the tribesmen, quote unquote, are wearing jeans and t-shirts.
I don't think they were. I think the guy that came in was wearing jeans.
The guy? No.
The guy that was stealing from
I made very certain of this.
Okay.
The man dancing around the fire, the shaman, he is wearing bangles and like a rough spun robe. But the other figures who are kneeling about the fire, and also the guy that takes his head off, which he then replaces with the mask, he is wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Yeah. And so are the other kneeling figures.
Okay, well, I think it's...
So it's contemporaneous.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 100%.
But they're not a primitive tribe, yet perhaps they've maintained a tradition.
Yes, that's my take on it.
But it's all a bit...
Well...
It's not much of an origin.
No, it's not much of an origin, but it also does not explain why, when this mask is put on by Stanley Ipkiss and Lieutenant Calloway and Cathey, suddenly they're pulling out cartoon guns. Yeah. And it's a cartoon world. There's no explanation for why...
Why would a mask from deepest, darkest Africa where guys
suddenly
are wearing jeans and t-shirts
behavior
as well? Well, maybe the tribe knows about... they're wearing jeans.
Maybe, but we don't see the shaman behaving in a Bugs Bunny kind of way, right?
Nothing about it makes sense. It's a bit infuriating, frankly. I think this is something the film handles a lot better, I think.
So anyway, in Returns, the mask ends up in the hands of a getaway driver. Like some people try to attack Calloway in his home.
This guy's even lamer than Stanley Ipkiss.
Yes, so some guys try to attack Calloway in his home, and he runs downstairs to try to dig up the mask, and he starts digging it up, but he's killed before...
Right as he digs it up. Yeah. He's about to put it on. Yeah. And then he gets shot in the back. And then, doesn't die instantly.
And then as they're leaving in the getaway car... as a gag, the guys in the backseat put it on the face of the driver, who is a bigger dweeb than Stanley ever was. Dweeb. But he becomes a mafia head. Cathey figures out the mask is back. She's got to do something about it because Calloway is now in a coma. Yep. So she ends up going undercover.
She seduces him because she's an absolute bombshell.
Yes.
She seduces the mask. This pops up in the film. Yep. Amazingly. Yeah. When I was reading this in the comic, I was like, oh my god, this exact thing happened. Yeah. The mask is besotted with her, that is Big Head. Big Head, the dweeby getaway driver wearing the mask, who's now become a mafia boss, is besotted with her. He's warped into, a guy holding a guitar, singing her plaintive love ballads and so on and so forth. He's ready to score, but she says, "No, I don't want to score with the guy with the big green head. You're going to have to take it off." And he's like, "I'm not taking it off. The mask stays on." And she goes, No, I love the guy under the mask." So he takes it off. Big dweeb. Yeah. "Well, she likes me for me," he stammers. Yeah. And then she comes back in and shoots him.
Yes. And she wears the mask for a lot of the second series.
Well, she wasn't going to wear it, but the goons hear the gunshot.
Yeah, she has to. She has no choice but to put it.
She runs up to the attic.
Yeah.
She barricades the door. They're banging it down. We get 5-6 panels of her nerving herself up to putting it on. She puts it on. But she's a little different. She's less big-headed.
Yes, she has more control.
She doesn't, because she's fighting it.
Yeah.
She's not giving in to her impulses. So she doesn't have the big white teeth. She's still got a green face.
Yeah.
But she doesn't have big white teeth, and her eyes aren't as large.
Yeah.
In fact, this is some quite good art, because the more power she needs, the more control she has to give up, and the more her face seems to resemble the archetypal big head. And she ends up fighting Walter. So Walter has been in prison. He's been, tearing shit up in jail.
Yeah.
The guards are scared of him. The warden's scared of him. The prisoners are scared of him.
Yeah.
They give him early release because they're all just terrified of him. He promptly goes back to working for the mafia. He's the bodyguard for some Don. He cuts his own face, cups the blood in his hand, throws it at the guy. It's all just very crazy shenanigans.
Yeah.
Walter's the only guy that can hold his own against the mask. Cathey, wearing the mask, is trying to take him out. She can't.
Yeah.
Partly because she is not giving in entirely to the corruptive power, but also partly because Walter is just the Terminator.
Yeah.
He can't be stopped.
Yeah, eventually she gives up. She takes off the mask, throws it on the ground, says, "Take it."
She says, "Take it. You can't be any tougher wearing the mask than you are without it."
Yeah.
Because you went toe-to-toe with someone wearing it.
But then Calloway drives through, smashes...
He's woken up from his coma.
Yeah, and he smashes... crashes his car right into Walter, much like Soichiro Yagami waking up from his heart attack and driving that van into Sakura TV.
It's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
I can't believe how much... If you had put on my bingo card for 2024, The Mask is a prequel for Death Note.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Yeah. And he smashes him into the water, and I guess the mask goes in there too, and they figure that's the end.
Yeah.
And
there is another run.
So there's another run.
I didn't read it.
No, I had to look through it, and part of it is... So, as I said, Doug Mank's art was getting really good in that second series when he was inking himself, especially. They had different inkers on the third one. Maybe there was a deadline issue. It's not quite as good art-wise.
No, I agree.
But it's basically a mask worshipper, a guy who thought the mask was a real hero, finds it by fluke, finds it in the water and starts wearing it.
Yep.
There is an interesting bit at the end of this one where Walter, who has survived, of course, gets a hold of the mask and puts it on. It has no effect on him.
Amazing. I would, of course, because he's pure id.
Yes.
And that's what the mask does. It brings out what you've buried, and he hasn't buried anything.
Yeah.
Everything's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Anything else we need to say about the comics?
Not much. We can just general reflections. So as I said, we got some fairly common magic object tropes. You can't... The millstone about your neck, you want to rid yourself of it, but you can't.
Yeah.
It's too powerful to get rid of, too powerful to hang on to, too dangerous to hang on to, too dangerous to get rid of, etc. And also, it grants wishes.
Yes.
But in the process of granting those wishes, by granting your heart's desire, you end up damaging...
So it's like a monkey's paw.
Exactly.
I think that maybe that...
This is very traditional.
But I think the twist is that it turns you into a cartoon character. I think that's the difference between this and your monkey's paw or your other evil object that grants wishes.
Sure. To me, though, I feel like the cartoon thing, I agree that it's there, but it becomes the most important thing in the film.
Right. Yes.
This, to me, feels more... Now, I read some interviews with various people that, Mike Richardson and so on and so forth, that were involved with the production of The Mask and the eventual production of the film. And I didn't write down the quote, but someone argued in one of these interviews that The Mask is a fairly kind of typical outgrowth of the trend, especially in film in the 80s, of horror comedies.
Oh, right, yeah.
And the example that leaps to mind, not least because the director of the eventual film worked on the series, is Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right.
So I think...
Yes, right.
Yeah, so Big Head is kind of like Freddy Krueger, really.
Yeah.
He controls...
Yeah, that's really true, especially the later Freddy Kruegers, yeah. Especially by 91, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so, yeah. That's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Okay.
So there's nothing... you can kind of plant it in the soil in which it was grown, in that respect.
Yeah.
It seems fairly of its time.
Yeah.
So, the film.
Okay, so this came out...
Yeah, sorry. Go on.
1994... Had you seen it before? Yes.
I had.
Okay.
I absolutely had. I had it on VHS. I used to watch it, yeah.
Okay. I saw it once at the cinema in 1994. Had not seen it since.
You and many people. Oh my god, really? You hadn't seen it in 30 years?
No. I have not seen it exactly 30 years. But at the time, we were psyched for this movie. So, we were psyched for Jim Carrey. So, Jim Carrey...
Interesting.
We were crazy about him because of In Living Color. We were all watching In Living Color nonstop.
So when you say we...
I mean, me and everybody I knew were in Canada. We're huge fans of In Living Color. And we're like... Jim Carrey was like the funny white guy on that show.
Yes.
And then Ace Ventura was... Now, he'd done some movies in the 80s for sure. Like...
Earth Girls Are Easy.
Earth Girls Are Easy, Love at First Bite. Or what was the vampire one? Anyway, he'd done a couple of things here and there. But then In Living Color, he just emerged as this bizarre talent. He had a stand-up special that came out,
yes,
which was really great. And then we were so excited for the first post-fame movie was Ace Ventura, and we were like, oh my god, we got to see this. And we saw it. It was totally hilarious at the time, very problematic now. But at the time, we were like, wow, this is exactly what we wanted. It was so crazy. And then there was another one, The Mask, which... you'll probably get to in the trivia, but they had managed to, at the time, because he was new, is emerging, they could afford him for that and for Dumb and Dumber.
That's right.
Right, those three were like...
He did 3 movies, and all of which were enormous successes.
Yeah. And this is probably... I remember I came home after the movie, my brother's girlfriend asked me, what did you think of it? And I remember thinking, I said, yeah, I really liked it. But I was never tempted to go back to it somehow, whereas I have seen Dumb and Dumber again. I have seen Ace Ventura.
How interesting.
This is the one that I somehow didn't come back to.
It's interesting.
And I read the comics, like I didn't, much like The Crow, I didn't start reading the comics until after I heard the movies announced.
You're hardly alone there.
And, but it was a hit for Dark Horse Comics in terms of sales, but I did not read them until after I heard the movie was coming out. Which was very common for me back in the... Even The Punisher. I didn't start reading Punisher comics until they announced the Dolph Lundgren movie.
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know. I read those comics and I thought... I had a certain impression. And then I came away from the movie and I was like, that movie was funny. But doesn't this feel like a really 90s movie? Doesn't it feel like Dick Tracy and the Addams Family and... every other movie we've talked about from the 90s.
It does feel like a 90s movie.
There's something about it.
See if we can tease out what we mean by that. But it's interesting that you say that, especially that you've since watched... It's interesting that you haven't watched it again in 30 years. I haven't watched it since I was a kid.
Yeah.
It was by far the most successful of those 3 films from 1994.
Right.
Commercially and critically.
It's definitely the most mainstream. I think those other 2 are really oddball comedies. I think Dumb and Dumber is like a gross out comedy for, I think they're weird. I think they're very weird movies. I think The Mask is like a superhero movie post Batman 89. It
does. I think it owes stuff to Batman 89, certainly. I think so. And we can get into that. Apparently Warren Beatty came up to Charles Russell, the director, in a restaurant and said, that's what I wanted to do with Dick Tracy.
Interesting. Yeah, it reminded me of Dick Tracy in a lot of bits. Maybe even just the color scheme of the Mask's outfits.
But I don't know. I mean, could you really say it's mainstream with the retro, with the...
Yeah.
I mean,
no, look, I remember the ads were so ubiquitous. Everyone was saying, smoking. Somebody stop me.
Yeah.
Everybody, those lines, that was from the trailer. Not even before the movie came out. People were so psyched for it.
And I'd like to get into, is this superhero movie?
Yeah.
At some point, perhaps after we talk a bit more about the film. So we have our questions.
Okay.
Is this a typical 90s movie? Is this a typical superhero movie?
Yeah.
Is this a mainstream movie? I'd like to come back to all three of those.
Charles Russell, the director, had directed Elm Street 3.
As I said,
which is...
The Dream Warrior.
Considered by most Dream Warriors, most people would say it's the best sequel.
Yeah?
Yeah, and it's a really good one. It has the notorious naked nurse scene, if you've ever seen that.
I can neither confirm nor deny that I've seen that.
His other movies, I looked at them and I can't remember what they were, but they were all kind of genre stuff for the most part.
He has done... Yeah, you're right. He's done Eraser.
Right. Okay, I remember that.
And connoisseurs of fine cinema will know that he directed The Scorpion King in 2002 with Dwayne Johnson.
I saw both of those in cinemas. But none of them were quite as good as this or Elm Street 3.
He himself has said that that he considers The Mask to be his best film.
Okay, so we start out in Edge City. I don't know if the city was ever named in the comic.
It wasn't. And this to me is pure 89 Batman.
Oh, yeah.
This is Gotham.
Yeah.
Why set your film in a made-up city? Because of Batman.
Yeah.
This is like whatever it was.
I have another idea about why it's in a fake city. Because I think it's in a fake world where people don't question a guy with a green head that can twist around in weird ways.
Possible.
And are like, oh my god, what just happened? It's a bit of an Addams Family universe where people don't ask questions about these weird things that are happening.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but to have a whole different city, to me it just feels like trying to recapture some 89 alchemy.
Maybe. So we start with a diver underwater under the... a scuba diver in the river who's found a cask underwater and he's trying to pop it open. There's some construction going on overhead and this big metal...
It's a pipe.
So
they're doing works in the bay.
And it falls onto the diver's head, or he kills him, and it cracks open the cask and this mask floats out of it.
Yep.
And then we had a title card that says The Mask, which is the title card that they screwed up the order of in last week's movie, where they had the title first and then showed the notebook falling out of the sky. This is the right order.
This is the right way to do it. We see the mask first and then the title.
Then you say the title, The Mask.
This is a great intro.
Yeah.
Very quick. Less than 2 minutes.
Yes. I would say actually the first 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes of the movie is so packed with stuff. In fact, you're wondering, watching it now, I was like, did the mask somehow orchestrate the falling of that beam into the water to kill the guy and crack open the cask?
It could be.
I mean, there's no mystical music or anything, but I was like, maybe?
Well, he was sawing it open himself.
Yeah.
And we just don't know. It could be the mask has that kind of malign influence on it, although it sort of never really demonstrates that kind of ability again.
Oh, I think it does. I think there's a key scene.
Except when he throws it out the window and it flies back in.
I think two key scenes. Okay. That's not the one I'm thinking of.
Fantastic. It's very possible. But, I mean, its main narrative function is to have the mask discovered, but without the scuba diver keeping it.
Yes.
So, the scuba diver's trying to get into this cask. It has a kind of Norse figure.
Yeah.
Sort of like some Viking kind of guy, a bearded guy wearing a helmet on the top of the box. He's trying to get it open. The pipe hits him on the head. He's conked out, possibly dead. The box open. There's a swarm of bubbles. We see the mask floating up. Titles, perfect. Less than 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Then we're introduced to... Apparently there was actually a longer sequence here at the start, including Vikings arriving.
Whoa. Okay.
So Vikings come in a CGI longship.
Okay.
And we see them depositing the object and leaving.
Okay.
Charles Russell made this film. Shot this scene apparently, but it tested poorly.
Oh, yeah.
People were like, I want to get... Where's the mask?
Yeah.
Let's get to the mask.
Yeah.
And they cut it, and very good idea, because it's perfect.
Yes. Yeah. You really don't need it based on what we get later in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Or how little we get later in the movie. So we're introduced to Stanley. He works in a bank. He has bought some concert tickets for himself and this woman to go to a show with, and she's like, I want to go with my friend. Can you get a third ticket? He's like, they're sold out. And he's like, okay, you go with your friend. And she's like, you're the nicest guy. Yeah. And by the way, before this, when he pulls the tickets out, he opens his desk drawer, and he's got some Looney Tunes comics in his desk drawer. It's a flash. This is a split-second shot. But you're being... Again, these first 5 minutes, you're just being bombarded with stuff.
I love this so much.
He pulls open the desk drawer, split-second shot of the Looney Tunes comic. Yep. Closes the door, gives the tickets. You're the nicest guy. He gives them up to her instead of going with her.
And he's bought these tickets to try and get a date with her.
Yeah.
And she's just... his friend comes up, says, that was the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. And Jim Carrey says, nah, I think I'm wearing her down. So we know now that it's not the first time that
he's trying to get this girl on a date.
Either, I mean, in good... Maybe that she's changed her mind in good faith, or that she's using him. It doesn't matter. All we know, he's been pursuing her for a while, and he's never got anywhere because he's relentlessly nice. And I suppose not assertive. He's a pushover. That's it.
By the way, we're getting credits here, and one of the story credits goes to Mark Verheiden, who was a writer at Dark Horse Comics. He wrote a lot of comics, but he also ended up going into TV and movies, and he wrote Time Cop.
He
wrote a bunch of Smallville. He wrote Heroes. He wrote for the Constantine TV series. Damn. And he wrote for the Daredevil TV series, and he wrote for the Swamp Thing TV series, the recent.
It's a good thing we don't track writers, because...
Yeah. Verheiden especially, because he had a background in comics. He wrote a lot of stuff that was like illustrated by Jeff Darrow as well, so there's a bit of a kind of...
this script, we'll get in... I'll talk a little bit about this in trivia, but this was in development hell for a while, this film.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
And it went through a few writers.
And yet, the comics really only came out in 91, so it couldn't have been that hellish.
Yeah, I agree.
It was a short hell. Maybe it was very hellish, but for a short period of time.
Even if we go with the date I read, 89, which may have been the South American iteration.
Version, yes.
Even then, it's not. It's 5 years.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so now Cameron Diaz walks into the bank.
Yep. Cameron Diaz.
What was her name? Her name was...
Tina
Carlisle.
Yep. This is her first film role.
Yes.
She's 20 years old.
Yeah.
Turns 21 during production.
Right.
And she's just amazingly good looking.
Yes.
And the camera lets us know, because we get some serious male gaze.
Serious male gaze, but maybe it's because I'm almost 50, but I found she was very innocent. Like, she's sexualized, and the camera sexualizes her.
A bit innocent for a vamp.
And she does that vamp, the lounge singer routine and everything, but I was like, she seems so innocent and pure in it. You know, maybe it's my age. I totally hear what you're saying. She's angelic in it. Like, she's like physically perfect.
She almost looks like she's not real, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone said earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised to hear she was as young as 20. But I hear when I read that, but
I think she'd been a model.
She had
for some time before this.
She'd been a model since she was about 15, 16 years old.
Okay.
She was working in Japan when she was cast.
Okay. So she comes into the bank to open a new account. Mm-hmm. Ipkiss's womanizing buddy tries to get her.
This is
to snare her.
This is the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. He's like, watch the master at work. I'll show you how.
Yeah.
This is how you get a girl.
She wants to speak to Stanley for some reason. She starts flirting with him. He's in disbelief, but then we see that she's got a little mini camera in her handbag.
It's not much of a mini camera, is it? I mean, it's an early 90s camera, because it's a huge, big, chunky camera inside a handbag.
Yeah, and she's filming the bank, and then we cut to these bad guys who are bank robbers.
To retrace our steps for a moment.
Yeah.
This whole scene is so sordid.
Yeah.
The film never sinks to these depths hereafter, but they're just absolutely eating her up with their eyes.
Yes.
She comes in, the goofy friend who thinks he's a lady killer, takes her coat, says, I'll do whatever you want, baby. She says, can you take my coat? I'll do whatever you want. He takes it, and then she wants to talk to Stanley. It later turns out that she's sick of being ogled and treated like eye candy.
Yeah.
And that's why she goes to Stanley, because he's so unassuming. But it's not quite clear at this point. So she goes and sits down with Stanley, and then the friend sniffs her coat.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
It's so sleazy.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd see something like that nowadays, really. But in the film's defense, it doesn't go back to this kind of level. But it's just interesting in the first. This is only about 5 minutes in.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in this first 5 minutes, yeah. So we cut, this is the first 5 minutes still. We cut to, once we see the camera and the low-res footage of the bank, it's obviously scanning the bars and stuff. We cut to these guys that are watching this on a monitor. And it's a bad guy played by Peter Greene from Pulp Fiction.
Yep.
And he very much reminded me of the bad guy in The Crow. Again, that was another thing. These are
90s bad guys.
90s bad guy.
I'm completely on board with you here as far as 90s aesthetic goes. These are 90s bad guys.
Yeah.
So they're wearing black.
Yes.
You know, henchmen, like tailored black.
Yeah. Yeah.
Piercings.
Yeah.
Smoking.
Yeah.
And dark rooms. Oh yeah, it's just like.
But the main tech guy, like the expert, the safe cracker guy, I guess.
I believe he's credited as Freeze, but they refer to him as Doc or Doctor.
Yes, and that actor was it Reg?
Yes, it was Reg E. Cathey or Cathey.
Yeah.
Kind of well-regarded...
He's a good actor.
Extremely well-regarded actor. Emmy Award-winning actor.
Yeah.
He won an Emmy for his performance in House of Cards.
Okay.
He was also in The Wire.
Yep.
And Oz, but we're bringing him up because he was in Tank Girl.
Yeah. Under a ton of makeup.
Under a ton of makeup. He was one of the Rippers. He was DT.
Okay.
The erudite saxophone-playing Ripper.
Right. Okay.
And I was thrilled to see him again.
Yeah.
And... He'll be back.
He'll be back. He'll be back in another episode, yeah. So they were talking about this. Meanwhile, the bad guy, Greene, I think his name is Dorian, Dorian Taylor, he is also, he's got a boss that's above him. So he's doing this bank job without the blessing of his boss. He's doing it on his own because he wants to make his own money, and he hates his boss. In fact, he puts out his cigarette in the eyes of a photo of his boss. I don't know why it's a photo of his boss.
So he can put cigarettes out on it. Why is he holding it?
He's holding
an
8x10 of his boss that he puts out his cigarette in the eyes.
It's this sort of thing that can only happen in a movie. You just love it.
Okay, cut back to Stanley. He's getting his car fixed at these mechanics who are obviously ripping him off. And
these mechanics, we've talked before about casting actors that look like comics and how hard that is. These guys look like... Because Stanley in the comics was also cheated out of his money by a couple of mechanics. And they're pretty good likenesses.
They're pretty good. And I will say, actually, Jim Carrey with the makeup on looks a lot like the drawings of the mask.
Unbelievable.
In the comic, yeah.
Jim Carrey... Say what? Jim Carrey, I suppose in 2024, how do we look at Jim Carrey?
Anti-vaxxer.
Anti-vaxxer.
Like a kind of hermit type with a huge beard.
Yep.
Disheveled, kind of eccentric.
Eccentric, yes. Posting odd videos of hitting on Emma Stone.
I didn't see that.
You know, and like a bit of a joke. Mm-hmm. But you watch this, and you can see why he was once the highest paid actor in the world. Yeah. Because it's fantastic. His performance in this is just amazing. Incredible.
Yeah.
And as you say, when he's wearing that makeup, he looks exactly like...
So, that's part of the everything being packed in the first 5-10 minutes I was talking about. Part of that was his performance, because he's doing something all the time. There's always a kind of joke of some sort happening. He's playing with his tie, he's just talking about his tie. All this kind of stuff is packed in there.
He's always gigging. I was reading, as I said, I read some more of those articles. I read one of those, you know what they call oral histories? Yeah. Which I think is a really lazy kind of journalism where you just talk to a bunch of people involved in a thing and then you just print their answers. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of those in the last 10 years. Yeah. I read one of those for this, and it just seems like he was always riffing. Yes. Always putting a different spin on a scene. Yeah. Always doing a bit. Apparently Cameron Diaz
We got to talk about... okay.
Cameron Diaz often has a smile on her face in scenes because she was tamping down laughter because Jim Carrey had been goofing off.
Right.
Or putting a funny spin on a scene.
Right.
In different takes, he was always doing a different performance.
Yeah.
When I hear that, I just think about Popeye.
Yes, I thought that when you mentioned it too.
And how Robin Williams was not allowed to improvise.
I'm curious to hear about the improvisation when he's got the mask on, because this is 94 CGI, and I feel like my prediction is he had to be really tight and follow the script and stand where he's supposed to stand and do what he's supposed to do, and not veer from that so they could do the CGI over him. But maybe you have something.
I have some data about this. I mean, I don't know for certain, but I can tell you what people involved in the production said.
Okay, so now he's supposed to go. He needs the car because he's got a double date with his friend from the bank.
They're going to
these two girls are going
finest 1940s era club.
Coco Banana? What was it called?
Something like that. Coco Banana.
Right. So they're about to go to this nightclub, but typical dweeb thing, Stanley's the only one that can't get in. He's shut out by the bouncer.
So they're a foursome. The two girls and the guy that bribed the doorman get in, and he just pulls the rope back across as soon as Stanley tries to get in.
And Stanley's driving the loan car from the mechanics, which is this worst...
It's the absolute bomb.
Absolute bomb. But, again, every interaction he has with this car is hilarious and interesting. Like, he's always got something going on. There's not a moment where something isn't happening, right? Everything he does with this car has some kind of gag.
Yep. He's always...
Very natural gag associated with it.
He's always doing flailing his arms and doing some kind of rubbery interaction with the door, with a part of the car that breaks off.
Yeah.
It all seems so natural, but you think it must have been scripted because he's pulling off a part of the car as he does it. So it just seems so organic.
Yeah, he ends up in a puddle somehow.
They throw him out.
Right. Then Cameron Diaz magically appears at the club.
Yeah, she gets out of going in the main entrance, she's
going in the back. It turns out she's a lounge singer.
She's a lounge singer. That's why she's not going in the main entrance.
Yeah. And he has a little interaction with her. She seems quite nice to him, despite the fact that she was only talking to him to get that bank footage for her boyfriend, because she's a mole, as we learn.
She's a mole and a mole,
Yes. Okay, so Stanley has to go home. He's driving across a bridge, and the car breaks down on the bridge. He gets out of the car, tries to look under the hood, see if he can fix it. He can't.
The whole car falls apart. So good.
Yeah, actually, it's really great with the way the bumper falls off and stuff. And he goes and looks out over the bridge, and he sees a person in the water, it seems like, and he goes down. It's not a person, but the mask is there in this pile of garbage.
He throws himself in the water trying to rescue... It's not a person, it's a pile of garbage.
Yeah, it's flotsam.
It looks like a person. Yeah. Again, we're really hitting us over the head with the fact that Stan is essentially a nice guy. Different from the comic iteration, where he was basically a jerk.
Well, we learn he's moody on page 2. Something's going on with him already.
Yeah. He's kind of he's kind of a prick. Like, he's put upon, but he hasn't maintained a sunny disposition, or he doesn't treat other people well. We don't really understand why he's with Cathey. Yeah. Here, Stan, in the film, Jim Carrey is relentlessly single because he can't succeed with... It even turns out to be a plot point later on when he meets a columnist that is written into about his unending lack of female companionship.
Yeah.
But, as I said, this is a guy who unhesitatingly throws himself into the freezing water of the bay of wherever Edge City is, presumably somewhere on the west coast. And... yeah, he finds the mask.
He finds a mask, he looks at it, it kind of has a glow, a shimmer effect on the inside of it when he looks at it. And for some reason he's kind of tempted to put it on. He starts creeping it towards his face for no particular reason.
Yeah, except to tease us.
Yes. But something about the mask is drawing him to put it on. He's interrupted by some cops that say, what are you doing down there? He says, nothing, I'm looking for my mask. He goes home, he's got this mean landlady.
Yep. He puts on some Tex Murphy cartoons.
Yes,
so
Tex Avery.
Tex Avery, sorry.
So he goes home. We see he's got a Tex Avery wolf statue.
Yeah.
Then he actually has got some videos. He puts on a video of Red Hot Riding Hood, where the wolf is like freaking out at the lounge singer.
There's some... Yeah. So we have more Chekhov's. They're not really. They're sort of Chekhov's guns, right? We've had the drawer with the tickets. We had a Looney Tunes magazine or what have you.
Yeah.
Now we have a Tex Avery statue, and then we have his videos. We've got some serious foreshadowing.
I'm going to say, yeah, I wouldn't call them Chekhov's
They're not really
guns.
foreshadowing.
They are. I don't even think it's foreshadowing. I think it's a in-universe explanation for why the mask is the way it is when he puts it on,
Absolutely.
which we never had in the comic.
Yes.
We don't know why
How is that not
why does Stanley in the comic when he puts on the mask suddenly become a carnival barker that ties up balloon animals?
Yes.
There's not really an explanation for that in that world.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
This obviously I went completely over my head as a kid, but it's perfect.
Yeah.
This is why, because it releases your deepest passions putting on the mask.
Yes.
And he's passionate about these old cartoons.
Yes.
And also he's a frustrated... Deep down, he's a chivalrous... Deep down, he's a frustrated romantic.
Yes.
Hence why he's so... he ends up... When he becomes the mask... Not Big Head, he's the mask in this movie. He's... What do they call him? Love Crazy Wild Man, I think
Right.
Jim
Something
Carrey
like
calls
that,
him.
yeah.
Himself, yeah. But I love it. Incidentally, Red Hot Riding Hood, the sequence, New Line, the producers told Charles Russell that he was not... Amazingly, he was not allowed to show Red Hot Riding Hood herself.
Oh.
So you notice we never see her.
Right. We only see the wolf.
We only see the wolf
Huh.
because she was too sexy.
Oh.
This is a cartoon from 1940s.
Well, according to Tex Avery, he claims that that cartoon was censored at the time it came out
Sure.
because she was too sexy.
Well,
She's a
I have no
proto
trouble-
Jessica Rabbit, right?
Yeah.
In this cartoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have no trouble believing that, Kumar, because she was censored in 1994.
Yeah. Interesting.
According to
But
Russell himself.
yes, and yet Cameron Diaz wears a similar outfit to that character on
Cameron
her
Diaz is a real
Lamborghini.
woman, and the camera goes right down her shirt.
Yeah.
And a cartoon's too sexy?
Yeah, that's maybe just
Well,
hypocrisy.
yeah.
Studio executive hypocrisy, maybe.
I have no trouble believing that.
Okay, so at some stage here, he's tempted to put on the mask. I can't remember what the sequence was that actually made him decide.
His landlady yells at him to turn down the cartoons. So he clicks off the VCR and puts on regular television, and it's a talk show.
Yes.
And they're talking to Dr. Moreau,
Yes.
who, I can't remember the name of the actor, but whenever I see him, I think of Ferris Bueller's
He is
Day
the
Off.
economics teacher in Ferris Bueller. Who says Bueller. The very boring guy, you know.
Bueller.
Yes.
Bueller. Anyone?
That guy.
He later appeared not appeared, but he later provided voice acting for the cartoon.
Okay.
That character, Dr. Moreau,
Right.
became a regular on the cartoon.
Right. Yeah, so after seeing that, he kind of jokingly says he'll put on the mask, and he puts it on, and we get this crazy CG effect, this whirlwind effect, where he's spinning around at top speed in his apartment.
Yep.
And he's got this cute little
Kind
dog,
of
by
like
the way.
Tasmanian Devil style.
Yes, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Maybe that's exactly what they were going for. Probably. And he's got this cute little dog that freaks out.
Milo's a dog.
Milo, as he's watching this happen. Good actor, that dog, by the way.
That dog is a fucking amazing actor.
Yeah. And when he stops, we get the smokin' Jim Carrey that we saw in all the trailers. He's got this kind of zoot suit and the big green face, and he's got these big teeth that he had to put in, like these prosthetic teeth.
Those prosthetic teeth, to return to earlier when I was praising Jim Carrey, those prosthetic teeth were supposed to be for non-speaking scenes. Jim
Right.
Carrey learned to talk with them in.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing he does is he goes out and he gets revenge on his landlady.
Yep.
She pulls a shotgun on him and shoots him, and he starts bouncing around, bam, 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 like
Yep. Very cartoon style, yeah.
cartoon style, and then falls out the window, splats onto the street, and then gets up like like the coyote.
Yep. Like Wile E. Coyote,
Like
when
Wile
he's
E.
been run
Coyote.
over by a steamroller or something.
Yes, right. Gets up, even though he's been flattened out on the street, and now immediately we've got all this. He's become a cartoon character. He's
Yes.
become a Chuck Jones character.
Yep. And the CG, even though this is 1994 era CG, I think it looks good.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it looks fine. It's held up really well because Jim Carrey is wearing a big green head.
Yep.
This is makeup, It took him 4 hours to put it on. Fairly normal stuff for a makeup job this elaborate. Probably not as long as Ron Perlman had to spend in to get the...
No, or Jim Carrey in The Grinch.
No, well, we'll return to The Grinch. Don't let me forget that. But he's wearing... These outfits are incredibly brightly coloured. And the cut makes them seem exaggerated. They have these sharp lines. It makes it look just like a drawing. So that when they layer the CG on top, it looks fine because he already looked like a cartoon.
Yeah.
We don't question it when he starts doing early 90s CGI cartoon effects.
Well, yeah. And there's moments, too. So we had the scene where he put on the mask, and then he does the whirlwind, and then he turns into the mask, and then he takes it off, and his face all stretches when he pulls it off. But you notice a lot of other times, people will jump behind a counter or a sofa or something, and then the transformation will happen.
Yep. It doesn't always happen.
No, on screen, because we'll just have some flashing lights in the viewers' faces.
Well, that's fine,
like the other
because it's very... Because this film is self-aware, or rather the writing is self-aware, in the sense that we're expected to get on board with the fact that the mask knows he's a character in a film, it seems at times.
He certainly delivers smoke and right at camera.
Not just that, but he addresses camera. He addresses the fourth...
And that happens... It does happen in the comic once...
But hardly.
There's one time when the mask is in the DA's office and he's looking for the DA's safe, the assistant DA's safe. It's behind a American flag, and he actually turns and looks at the reader and says something like, "Don't blame me for not figuring it out sooner," or something like that. Yeah,
for sure. But this ain't She-Hulk. It's not doing.
No. It's not all the time. It just happens.
On the other hand,
it only happens a couple times in the film, I think.
Only a couple, but it's certainly more than the comic. I think we're invited to see the mask as a guy that can break the fourth wall and talk to us, the audience. Yeah.
Yes.
He's a Deadpool-like character.
A little bit.
I
don't know if he's really addressing the audience or just looking straight in camera. You know what I mean?
Is he nodding to camera or is he addressing the audience? Is there a big difference between those two? Certainly the Deadpool comparison has occurred to people in the intervening years, and I read interviews with Russell and some of the other people involved where interviewers have point blank asked them,
right,
do you think, at this point, of course, Deadpool had become a massive runaway success, do you think Deadpool and the mask share any kind of connective tissue? And of course they say, yeah. Damn right. Deadpool's just the mask.
Right.
Remade.
Right. So he tumbles with some street roughs.
Yep.
As happens in the comic. He folds up the Tommy gun, just like in the comic. Do some animals first, and then the Tommy gun out of the balloons, as he does in the comic.
It's exactly like the comic. It's so cool.
There's a huge difference. He fires over their heads. Nobody dies.
You're right. That is a huge difference. I mean...
He goes to the mechanics
it's
who
worth
ripped them off.
At this point that the tone of the comic and the film are completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Because the comic is ultra-violent.
Yes.
And almost...
Gory.
It's gory. It's a horror. It could be called a comedy, but it's a horror comedy, kind of like Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
Here, no one dies.
PG-ish, maybe. Nobody dies. He goes after the mechanics. We don't see what he does to the mechanics, but the next day we see that the mechanics are alive, but like one of them's had a...
They both had mufflers shoved up their butts.
Shoved their butts, yeah.
And it's like, get me a proctologist on standby.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so he has a slightly different power set to the Big Head in the comics. Big Head could summon weapons and was immune to harm, but he couldn't change the behaviour or the world of people around him.
That's right.
Whereas the Mask in the film, he can pretty much do anything.
Yes, that is right.
Those bikers...
I'm not sure if he's immortal in the movie, because he dodges bullets instead of just taking them and having huge holes formed. Maybe it's just because of the PG rating. But when another character gets the mask, he does get bullets in him and they don't harm him. But when Ipkiss has the mask, it's not clear. I have to
respectfully disagree. I think he's just doing it for fun.
In fact...
Because he does get shot.
He does...
And he says, "Did you miss me?" Again, a quote from the comic.
Yes.
"Did you miss me? I guess not." Except in the comic, when he said, "Did you miss me? I guess not," he's covered in blood.
Yeah.
In the film, he drinks a glass of orange juice?
Yeah, or something, yeah.
And it all comes out of holes in him, and then he says, I guess not. So what was my point? It doesn't matter. He's immune to bullets, I think.
Yes, you're right. He is immune because of that scene. I had another point too, but I can't remember.
I was talking about how he could affect things around him. Most notably, the maracas.
Yes.
Scene.
Well, even there's a scene where he sings in the Cocoa Banana or whatever it is, and the band just plays his song, and you have to headcanon it and say he's controlling the drummer.
Well, he can do that.
Yeah.
He touches them and takes control of them.
Okay, the thing I was going to say was there's a point where a piece of his costume gets shot off and it transforms back into his usual bit of clothing, which presumes there's some sort of vulnerability, right? Because if you shoot off a piece of his clothes, his shirt, it turns back into his pajamas. So it's not consistent.
So if you shot off his arm,
would it turn back into his regular arm?
It would turn back into a human arm, not
a mask arm.
A demigod arm or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I'm not super happy about that whole story with the pajamas.
I am, and I'll tell you why when we get to it. Which we're almost there, because he wakes up the next morning after he's done the mechanics, and he thinks it was a dream for a brief moment. All the stuff he'd done the night before, but then Lieutenant Calloway shows up at his door.
Yep.
And he says, your landlady shot a guy with a shotgun out here last night. Did you hear anything? He's like, no. But
he claims to have an inner ear problem, and then he does the Jim Carrey-esque mannerism.
Yes.
Where he sticks his little finger in his ear.
Yes.
Wiggles it wildly.
Right.
While raising his eyebrows.
Right. But Calloway makes a joke about his pajamas, which he says those pajamas are impossible.
Yeah.
At the pace things have been going in this movie, I just took that as a gag, not as a plot point. I thought it was really well placed in that way.
Okay, that's fair.
I was like, I didn't think about it watching the movie until it came up later as a plot point, because it was just going as fast as everything else.
Where are we? 15 to 20 minutes into the film at this point?
Yeah, I don't know. After Calloway leaves, Stanley tries to throw the mask out the window, and it boomerangs back.
Interesting moment. It let him live out his wildest desires, and his first impulse is to throw it out the window and get rid of it.
Yeah. Well, he thought it was a crazy dream he'd had.
First of all, but then he realises that it wasn't.
That's
when
right.
Calloway comes to the door and he looks out the window and he sees the holes in the floor where he bashed them with a big Looney Tunes hammer.
Yeah.
He sees the holes in the walls where his landlady blew a hole with a shotgun, and he realises it was all true. And his first thing he does is, I want no part of this.
Well, we had the same line as in the comic. When he first splattered on the street, he says, I have powers.
Yeah.
I'll be a superhero, but first... I'll get revenge on these
He gets revenge on the mechanics, yes.
Yes. So I think he realizes, unlike the comics version where he's immediately wearing camo the next day, he's like, oh, this is too powerful, this is bad, whatever. It's a supernatural, paranormal object that he's like, whoa, this is a scary thing. He tries to throw it away.
Yeah.
He doesn't see it come back.
I think it makes him a little more virtuous.
Yes.
I imagine that's the purpose.
Yes.
He's immediately realised that this is dangerous, and he wants no part of it.
Yeah. He comes into work that morning late.
Yep.
His friend shows him, in the newspaper, Cameron Diaz, Tina Carlisle, the lounge singer. There's an article about her on the front page.
Yep.
Boss comes in, who's this young guy that's the son of the owner of the bank. Has an interesting line here where he says, stop oogling girly pictures. Oogling.
He misread
the line. Nobody corrected him.
I just let it slide, but you're so right. Why didn't someone say, hang on, man?
Why didn't maybe somebody thought it was funny that he said oogling.
Stop oogling.
Oogling girly
pictures. This was a guy that,
So this reporter comes to the bank. Her name is Peggy Brandt, I think, or Grant. She was at the mechanics, and she's following up this story.
She's a gossip columnist or a advice columnist?
She was, and she's trying to become a real reporter.
Yeah.
Stanley's friend at the bank immediately was like, hey, I'm going to get this one, right? Because she's another pretty woman, very attractive lady.
Yeah.
But she's immediately going, I want to talk to Stanley.
Yeah,
this
so
guy's
it's a
like
repetition of the Cameron Diaz scene.
Yes.
All of these attractive women are walking in the bank and only want to speak to Stanley, and he can't fathom it.
Yes. So because she pulled his car records for repair, so she knows that he was a customer of these guys, and he denies because he remembers that he actually not killed those guys, he sodomized those guys with mufflers. He knows that, he's like, I had nothing to do with that. But she gives him this spiel about how he actually wrote a letter to her advice column about nice guys finishing last.
Yeah.
And she's like,
she remembers him.
She's like, oh, hundreds of girls in the city would love a guy like you.
Yeah.
I'm one of them, she says,
she does.
in fact, in this scene. And he's like, okay, and she gives him her card.
Yep.
And she leaves. Now we cut to Nico, who's the head of the crime organization, and a crazy scene with Dorian where he puts a golf tee in his mouth to torment him and put him in his place, and then shoots a golf ball off his mouth and says, stop running operations on your own, you work.
Well, he tells him he's got a week to get out of town.
Yes, that's right. Going to throw him out of town.
He makes him hold a golf tee in his teeth, puts a ball on top of the tee, hits it off with his, his iron.
Yeah.
And says, you got a week to get out of here, or I'm going to be, the next time, I'm going to be using your skull to test out my...
It's shot really well, because somehow they got the golf tee. Peter Greene really acts this scene well, where it looks like he's been hit in the mouth with it, but surely they didn't.
No, they've just dabbed some blood, but he sells it. Yeah. And we can just see that he's seething. I love this, because it adds so much depth to a later event when he himself gets access to the mask.
Yes.
We can see he's just seething with inferiority, frustration, repressed rage, anger. Yeah. I just think this is the last person in the world that should be putting on. Yeah. Nico himself, if he put it on, it might be like Walter. He'd probably not change. But
right.
Because he's just a man that's utterly secure in his domain, utterly in charge of everything, whereas Dorian is ambitious and frustrated and just an absolute cesspool of desires and anxieties and monstrous affectations. I love it. It's great. When I rewatched it, I'm skipping ahead here, but when I rewatched this, I was stunned to see how lame Dorian looks when he's wearing the mask.
He looks like Boone from Nightbreed.
I haven't seen Nightbreed.
Okay.
I've read the book.
Okay.
But he looks like a Goomba from the Super Mario Brothers movie. Right. Like, just how unfrightening and how little screen time he gets. Mm. Whereas when I watched it as a kid, this was terrifying to me. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's because we get such a great setup in terms of his character. We just know that the mask lets out what you have deep inside, and what this guy has deep inside is not good news for anybody. Yeah. Yeah. Stanley has a dream of Tina. It's the same scene where he was outside the club where she pulled up, but he's really smooth in this one. Except he's not that smooth. He's still a dork's idea of smooth. Because he does the Jim Carrey thing. He takes a drag on a cigarette and then wiggles his head around Jim Carrey style. He's a dork, but it works. Like, it doesn't matter that he's a dork. Yeah. She still, comes up to him. She's about to kiss him. She's just licking his ear like crazy, and he wakes up and it's the dog. And he acts like this is really disappointing. Yeah. Let's not explore that anymore. Okay, so now, finally, these guys are going to pull off their bank robbery. Mm-hmm. Which just happens to be the bank. Well, it doesn't happen to be. It's established in the first scene. It's the bank that Stanley works at. Yes. But Stanley has decided he was going to go to the club as the Mask. He wants to see Tina. Yeah. But he needs money. Mm-hmm. Once he puts on the mask this time, and he's like, okay, I'm going to rob a bank. He decides to rob the same bank that Stanley works at. What a great idea. So he ends up in a fight with the bad guys that are robbing the bank. Mm-hmm. And he actually clears the place out of money before they... And then they get busted by the cops, essentially. Yes, and they start shooting at the cops as soon as the cops show up. I think that's a bad idea. Run away, but don't shoot at the cops that are driving up the road. You're going to get yourself in worse trouble for shooting at a police officer. I agree. They get in a gunfight. Doc dies from his injuries
Yes.
back at the club.
Yeah, they do the bad guys do several dumb things in this movie.
They do.
Okay, so now we get to the club scene. The mask he shows up at the club. He rains money on the bouncers and gets in.
Yep.
Here's where we get the thing where he's got the big green face. People start saying he's wearing a green mask. Later on, they say that, but he does crazy things in this club, and nobody's like. So now we get the Red Hot Riding Hood sequence where he's like the wolf, and he sees Cameron Diaz doing her lounge,
Jessica Rabbit
scene. I would also say a bit like, really, 20-year-old Cameron Diaz here has totally outclassed Madonna in the same role in Dick Tracy.
You just cannot resist digging the boot into Madonna.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't say these things with the ongoing lawsuit. I've been advised by our lawyers to stop commenting on Madonna's performance in Tracy. Okay, but she's totally outclassed her in this one scene.
Yeah,
but we've got a lot of CG effects of like the mask's eyes bugging out.
It's just like the Tex Avery stuff. Like the wolf. He's doing wolf whistles where his face turns into a wolf.
Yeah.
The heart pumping out of the chest.
Yeah.
The tongue, the scene everyone remembers from the mask where his jaw hits the table and his tongue rolls out like a red carpet.
Yeah.
And it all looks fine because Jim Carrey in this makeup, and he's wearing this bright, it's the suit everyone thinks of when they think of the mask. It's a bright yellow zoot suit. It already looks like he's in a cartoon.
Yeah.
So it works.
Yes. So after she does her routine, he goes up and does this song and dance number with the band. As I said, maybe he's magic controlling a band.
He must be.
And then he does a dance with her, where he's doing all these crazy moves, where he's like twirling, like his legs are twirling around each other.
Yeah. The audience isn't questioning it. No. I guess it's his reality warping powers affect the audience as well.
Maybe, or this is just a world where
that kind of thing happens.
Questioned.
Maybe there are other masks.
It doesn't happen. I don't think it happens all the time, but I just think people for some reason are not. For the story to work, people can't be like, whoa, that guy's legs twisted around like licorice.
Yeah, when people, because later on they arrest Stanley for the crimes of being the mask. And as evidence, he just has a regular rubber mask on him, and they're like, well, this proves it.
Yes. Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
No.
The mask is doing impossible shit.
Yes.
You need an L character to identify what the Death Note is.
Right.
No, but they don't do that.
No.
Yeah.
No. Okay, so now, because Doc has come back, he's injured, the bank robbery has gone AWOL, it has gone, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's gone wrong. Fubar.
It's totally gone Fubar, right. The guys are like, Dorian's like, well, who did this? Who was the guy that robbed the bank before you? And he happens to be in the club. And they're like, it was that guy down there. So they go down and they start shooting. They say, let's get that guy. They start shooting at him in the club. Why not try to do this discreetly in some way, capture the guy?
Because they're schlubs.
Absolutely. They're just...
they're idiots.
Idiot logic.
So Nico is the professional hitting golf tees out of people's mouths. But Dorian's just... like, he doesn't know how to run a crew.
No.
They think the way to deal with this is to throw everyone out of this rich new club where they want to attract an exclusive clientele. Throw everyone out at gunpoint and then shoot the mask in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Terrible idea. Anyway, as you say, he does all this dodging shit. Eventually, he
has
does
a cowboy death. This cowboy death was one of the funniest bits in the movie to me, where Tell
Ma to let old Yeller out.
Yeah.
Tell Scarlett I never gave a damn.
Yeah.
And then he accepts his Oscar.
Yes. Yes.
So he says, you love me, you really love me.
Yes.
Instead of you like me, you really like me, which I don't understand why you would change it.
I don't think it matters. I never even noticed while it was happening.
Because it's Sally Field accepting her Oscar in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And she said, you like me, you really like me. Why not just say that?
Yeah.
Was there some sort of copyright issue?
I don't know. There were some references to things in here that were very 90s-ish that now have been lost in time.
I think any number of them. Do people still know what Old Yeller is?
No, yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there were certain bits that I can't remember them now, but definitely there were some gags because it was coming so fast that were very of the time. like sitcoms of the time, things like that.
It's interesting because one of the goals of Russell and the people that were making the film was that they wanted it to be, they wanted it to have this retro feel. And one of the reasons why they wanted to have that was so that it wouldn't age too harshly.
Right. That sort of worked?
Yeah, I think so. So Russell, in an interview I read, one of those, that aforementioned oral history thing, he said, talking about the retro scent, like the zoot suits, the swing music. Interestingly, in more than one place on the internet, this film is credited with helping to inspire the swing craze of the late 90s.
Okay.
Which you're familiar with, Kumar, of course, because of your love for the film Swingers.
Yeah.
He says, "You'll notice all the suits and ties and everything. They were not of 1994. I had seen my other films begin to age, and I did not want this one to age. It was a very specific goal from me, our art director, our production designer, and our wardrobe designer. We were really inspired to do something that would be a little timeless. My excuse for this was that it was a comic book movie, i.e. it existed in comic book reality. But my reasoning was that I actually didn't want it to age. And it's the only film, if I see it on cable, that I will end up watching the whole thing." That was 2019 when he said that.
Okay. So this is the scene where a bit of his suit gets shot off by the guy.
And it becomes the
And when the
ugly
cops
pajamas,
come in, and the cops come into the club, and then they find, Calloway finds a little piece of the suit, which is turned back into the impossible pajamas.
Yep.
Which he had joked about.
Those pajamas
earlier.
are impossible, yeah.
Yep. Next morning, because he's got the piece of pajama, he comes back to...
Lieutenant Calloway comes straight
back. Back to Stanley.
He's there first thing in the morning.
Yeah, but Stanley opens the closet for some reason, and the money that's from the bank just pours out in a really hilarious bit. It reminded me a little bit of the scene with the skin mags from...
Nicky Larson.
From Nicky Larson,
Yeah.
Yeah, where they all just spill out.
And he's trying to shove them back in.
Yeah. So he's trying to shove the money back in the closet. It's really hilarious.
And of course, Jim Carrey's just absolutely hamming it up.
Yes.
He's just flailing his limbs around.
Yes.
Trying to shove it back in with his shoulder.
Yeah.
You can see it in your mind's eye. You can just see Jim Carrey frenetically trying to do an activity.
He somehow manages to get rid of Calloway again. He goes to the bank late again.
Yep. This time, though, he tells off...
He tells off the boss. He says he knows that he's been cooking the books or something, and he can expose him.
"Listen here, monkey boy.
Yeah.
Do you want me to tell Daddy how you've been running this place as your own personal piggy bank? Or maybe I should call the IRS, see if I can arrange a holiday for you at Club Fed."
Tina comes to the bank again.
Yes.
To talk to Stanley. She says she's going to leave town. I think it's
I don't think it's here.
Okay.
No, here she says she's not going to be able to open an account after all.
Oh, right. That's right.
She's said this. It's not 100% clear. It seems to be because she senses that there's a connection between Stan and the mask. Because the mask has seduced her.
Yes.
At the club.
That's right. When they had that dance, they had a kiss.
Yep.
During the dance
her
number.
shoes fly off.
Yes.
But she's come to the bank ostensibly to say, I won't open the account after all, but there's no reason for her to do that. Instead, it seems to be that she
seems to suspect that Stanley is the mask.
Yeah. But she doesn't come out and say that.
She doesn't say it, and her performance is really pretty great for a first movie.
Yeah, I agree.
Selling the suspicion. Because I was watching the scene like, does she suspect? And then the next time they have a scene together, it's clear she suspects. And I'm like, wow, she really somehow sold it in this scene that she suspected him.
Stanley, Jim Carrey says, yeah, the mask, I know him.
Very Peter Parker. I know Spider-Man. I can arrange a meeting with Spider-Man for you.
So they arrange a date at Landfill Park at sunset?
Yes.
Great,
but before that, he
goes to visit Dr. Moreau.
Yes.
Dr. Moreau.
Yeah, the mask expert.
Yeah.
Who...
He has all these
This
masks.
guy is... he's not a mask expert. He's written a book about how people metaphorically wear masks and are not at their true
He's
selves.
a psychologist.
Yes.
Or a
pop psychologist.
And his passion is masks. Because when in his office, he has about a dozen masks on the wall behind his head.
Yeah, he's a collector of these things.
So he's able to identify the mask which...
He says it looks Scandinavian, probably a representation of Loki.
That's exactly what he says. The night god Loki, an invention for this film.
But he said he was the god of mischief, and he explains all this kind of stuff.
Incidentally, I love this. I'm absolutely fine with...
This is a good bit of explanation. It's enough.
Yep.
It's just enough explanation.
Just enough.
Better to cut out the Viking scene at the beginning, leave us with this bit. Absolutely. This is also the scene where I'm saying the mask has control over what's going on, because Stanley says, I'm going to show you what this mask can do, and he tries to put it on. It has no effect. Which to me is the mask saying, no, we're going to keep working together, and you're going to keep putting me on.
Possible, but also the mask... The rules of the mask seem to be that it doesn't work in the daytime. We only ever see it working at night. And hence why Loki is described erroneously as a night god, which is not true.
If I'd heard that night god line, I would have picked that up maybe. Okay.
Sometimes it's...
Well, your explanation is better. It sounds more correct. Okay, they've got Stanley's fingerprints from the bank.
Yep. Of course they do. He works there. I have a problem with this. His fingerprints will be everywhere.
Wait, where's fingerprints on the something else?
Well, that's the thing. They're probably in the vault where they have no business being. Are they suspected of being an inside job?
Yes, and then Calloway says, "Get me the fingerprints of all the bank employees." So they've got his. So they're following him.
Yep. They suspect him of being the robber, even though they've seen him doing plainly impossible things on the footage. We see him turning into the Tasmanian Devil whirlwind.
And they're like, "Oh, this guy's fast.
This guy's fast. I wish the people at my bank were this fast." They say, "What?"
Yes, doesn't add up.
So I'm coming down more and more on your argument that Edge City exists in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
Okay, they have he has a meeting in the park where he has to run away behind a bush and turn into the mask. This is a very Peter Parker's kind of... Actually, it's a lot like Superman flying off the balcony in Lois Lane's apartment, coming back as Clark Kent through the front door.
Yes, it is very much like that. Interestingly, though, Cameron Diaz is not about the mask.
No.
In fact, she needs him in the balls.
Yeah.
That's right. In fact, he says some very...
She's kind of two minds about him. Like, she's curious about having this bad boy, I guess.
Yes.
But then at the same time, when he comes on where she doesn't need him in the balls, as
she's
you
not,
said.
Yeah, he comes on too strong.
Yes.
You're right. Cameron Diaz plays it really well. When he comes on too strong, she's not about it. And yet she's fascinated by... Perhaps she's fascinated with how much he's like Stanley, because we've established by this point, I think, that she has some kind of connection with Stanley. Anyway, there's some very non-PG dialogue. The mask has become a kind of French pervert.
Yes. Yes, that's right. He's got the striped shirt and the beret on.
And like a twirly... Has he got a twirly mustache?
Maybe.
He's got a beret and a striped shirt, certainly. It's like open to the navel.
Yeah.
And he says this filth. Kiss me and I will reveal my croissant.
Yes.
I will spread your pâté and dip my ladle in your vichyssoise.
Yes.
What, you couldn't show Red Hot Riding Hood, but you can put that shit in?
Yeah. Okay.
Then the cops show up.
To arrest the mask.
Yep.
There's a bit of a funny scene here where they empty his pockets and stuff just keeps coming out. My favorite bit was a photo of Calloway's wife, which
says like, call me.
Yeah. A photo of this to me was the second biggest laugh in the movie.
I definitely laughed when I saw that too.
Yeah.
It's got her number. Call me.
Yeah.
And then Calloway's like,
"You son of your wife."
And he's like, "You son of a bitch." And he says like, "Where's a camcorder when you need one?"
Yeah, that was
to Rodney King. I'm not.
Yes, that was a Rodney King line. That one has
very
hasn't
topical.
aged out. Yeah, has not aged out.
In fact, it's probably funnier now than it was at the time, because it was probably a bit raw at the time. Because when were the LA riots? Not long before that.
Yeah. So he runs away from the cops. He gets away from them somehow. I can't remember exactly. But he closes the gate to Landfill Park. Outside is an army of cops waiting for him. This is when we get the famous Cuban Pete number.
It's so good.
He just does this big song and dance routine. I was watching the credits and it actually says performed by Jim Carrey. So it was.
And what's more, he had the flu at the time.
Whoa. Okay. This is a hard-working man.
They just shoved him out.
Wow.
later on when he's making $20 million a movie, he wouldn't have been performing with the flu. But back then,
right.
They just said, "Get the fuck out there, Jim Carrey.
Right.
You want to go back to In Living Color?"
Yeah. So other people, like the cops, are all singing. Some of the cops are singing along with him because he's controlling them, etc. He runs away because Calloway finally gets out of there.
Yeah.
Because the mask had locked the gates, as I mentioned. They finally climb over the fence. So he runs away and he takes off the mask. I'm not sure why.
It's never really clear why
they
anyone
suspect that it's Stanley. So they're going to arrest him with his Stanley face on or his mask face.
It's never really clear why anyone would ever take off the mask. Just like I suppose it's never really clear why anyone would ever change back from Miracle Man to Regular Man.
Yes. So Peggy, the reporter, suddenly pulls up and saves him.
Yes.
In a car. She takes him to some
warehouse. Oh, it's I think it's actually the printing factory for the newspaper
the print
that she
shop,
works
okay.
at. Yeah.
Because she had heard the news about him being out there or whatever.
And at the moment, we think she's on his side.
Yes.
In fact, we think that she's his real love interest.
Yeah, she actually starts giving the speech about
nice guys should finish first, and she's actually got a crush on him, and then Dorian shows up, and she just stands up and says, "Thank God, finally! Do you realize how long I've been stringing this guy along?"
Yeah.
And Callow, 13-year-old me, at this point was shocked.
Yeah.
12-year-old actually. Shocked, I tell you.
Yeah.
At this betrayal.
Yeah. So Dorian puts on the mask. Now he's the owner of the mask, which is a thing that happens in the comic, right? It changes hands.
Yep.
So he puts on the mask.
And it's very much played sinisterly.
Yes. And his voice changes too.
A horrible storm cloud appears the closer it gets to his face.
Yes, a bit like in the first Child's Play when the soul goes into Chucky.
A great reference.
There's a storm overhead.
Yep.
Right overhead. Stanley gets thrown in jail.
Yep.
Tina comes to visit him in jail. And they almost have a kiss. It's like she likes Stanley, but she
pretty much tells him that she likes him.
Yeah, but she's got to leave town.
Yep.
But as she's leaving, she's chased by some goons.
Yep.
Some of Dorian's goons who are trying to capture her. Milo, the clever dog, is outside the jail and jumps up the wall into the cell, managed to get the keys off the guard, so he's able to escape. Stanley's able to escape. Meanwhile, Dorian wants revenge on Nico for being Nico.
Yep.
And he wants to blow up Nico's club. He wants to blow up the Coco Banana?
Whatever it's called.
Whatever it's called. It's Coco something.
Coco something.
But Stanley has escaped. He has taken Calloway hostage. So he's got Calloway in the getaway car with him. And Milo the dog. And they get to the club and he's going to go into the club. Dorian has the mask. So now we basically get a elaborate climax where Tina convinces Dorian to take off the mask for a moment before he kisses her.
Just like in the comic.
Like in the comic. And when he takes it off, she kicks it. She gets a leg free and kicks it out of his hand.
And then, brilliantly, Milo the dog gets it.
Yes.
And he becomes Milo.
He puts the mask on accidentally.
And, it's so good. Dog's running around with this enormous head.
Really, first time I saw this movie, I remember being really unexpected development to have
the dog capable of wearing the mask.
Yes, yes.
Like he urinates on one of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Sniggers. He's very much a cartoon character.
Yeah.
Like Muttley, the dog from Wacky Races or something like.
Yeah.
he's like wheezing with laughter as he pisses all over one of the henchmen.
Yes.
Stan and Dorian get in a fist fight.
Yes.
So Dorian triumphs essentially over. Stan triumphs over Dorian without the mask.
Yes.
He beats him into submission
Yeah.
and saves Cameron Diaz without using the mask.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
This is a key
It is key.
thing in so many... Well, it's a trope, right? In Hollywood movies where you have to prove that you can do it without the magical
without the
object.
thing. Yeah. To show you're a true hero.
Yes.
That it's the human qualities.
Yeah, you didn't need that thing all
Superhero
along.
is... The human qualities, the superhuman hero qualities are what really count. And sure enough, he does that. But then in the end, he still needs the mask anyway because...
There's too many guys there.
There's too many guys. There's the bomb's about to go off. Cameron Diaz is still tied to the bomb. This is where he says, "Did you miss me?"
Yes.
And
he does a bit of a Clint Eastwood impression here.
He doesn't just...
Which, if you've seen, Jim Carrey doesn't need the makeup to do this Clint Eastwood. If you've ever seen it, he does a wild... He melts his face into Clint Eastwood's face.
Yep.
Anyway, and then he turns the water fountain as Dorian is crossing it. He draws a picture of a flush on the pole that Cameron is tied to.
Such a cartoon moment.
And flushes it, and it turns the fountain into a flush, like a toilet.
And he gets flushed away.
He gets flushed
That's
away.
it. And then he decides to dispose of the mask.
Yes.
He and Cameron Diaz go to a bridge with...
He doesn't get arrested because the mayor happened to be in the club, and he saved him along with the other people that were going to be blown up in the club.
Oh, yes. And the mayor attests that Dorian was the mask.
Yes.
Because, in fact, he saw him. Dorian, as I said, less than 5 minutes screen time as a mask-wielding demigod, psychopath with unlimited power. He just he gets shot and then spits the bullets back.
Yeah.
And it looks way worse, of course, because he's not a cartoon.
Yeah.
Instead, he's a monster.
Right.
He looks lame. Watching this now, probably 25 years since the last time I saw the film, Dorian, very underwhelming when he's wearing the mask. But I remember as a kid being terrified.
Yeah.
And I think
he looks like somebody else I'm trying to remember too.
He just looks really silly. They've built up his shoulders. He's so top heavy.
Yeah.
It's
a different actor.
It's because... Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Of course.
As well.
But it's because the film does such a good job of letting us know about his flaws as a human.
Yeah.
And we know that Loki's mask releases your urges, that it feels bad.
Yeah.
You know, this is bad. It was obvious even to me, as a callow youth. Right. So, Jim Carrey has already resolved that the mask causes more trouble than it's worth. He told the reporter lady that betrayed him that it's ruined his life because he's running around unshaven. He's not getting any sleep. He's being late for work. Apparently that's equivalent to ruining your life. And he decides he's going to get rid of the mask, which he promptly does. But he seems to have thrown it in shallow water.
Yes.
A few meters away from the bridge.
Yeah.
And his goofy womanizing mate, promptly goes straight after it. But Milo has beaten him to it. Milo the dog has already grabbed the mask and is swimming back to shore with it. Jim Carrey kisses. Cameron Diaz says, "Smokin'." Roll credits.
Yes. And 5 minutes into the credits, one of the very last credits is based on characters appearing in Dark Horse Comics. Yeah.
Yeah, I also...
Really late in the game.
Infuriated by how long I had to wait for that.
Yeah. And we did have a sequel called Son of the Mask.
Well, we'll talk about sequels.
Years later.
Depending on if we have enough time for trivia.
We have lots of time.
Brilliant.
We always have tons of time.
All right. Let's start, as we always do, with how much this movie cost and how much it made. Okay. Right, this movie cost not a lot. Even in 1994 dollars, 18 to 23 million.
Okay.
Was the budget. Box office take, $351.6 million.
Whoa. Okay.
Which made it, when it came out, the second highest grossing comic book movie after Batman 89, obviously. And in terms of how much money it made versus how much money it cost, the most profitable comic book movie of all time.
Right.
A record it held for many, many years.
Okay.
Not even Marvel could beat this record.
Okay.
It wasn't until 2017, when Joker came out, that film finally beat the Mask's record for being the most profitable comic book movie of all time.
Interesting.
So how did it get made? So as we've talked in previous episodes about the Mike Richardson New Line Cinema movie pipeline, I'm not quite sure if this was the first, because apparently as early as the sort of like 1990, Richardson was shopping this idea around movie studios. But certainly it's the most successful.
Right. Well, the early shopping around and the development how we talked about are interesting because T2 doesn't come out until 91. So I don't think the technology or the willingness to spend billions of dollars on digital effects was there.
Right.
to make this movie before 94. I can't imagine it coming out in 93 or 92.
It's interesting you say that, because I want to return to that point about spending millions of dollars on CGI. So, as I said, they shopped it around, took it to New Line, some point between 89 and 91. New Line immediately thought, this is the next... Remember the comic. Ultra-violent, funny, but mostly kind of like horror.
Yeah.
They said, this is the next Freddy Krueger.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Because, of course, New Line is the studio that Freddy Krueger made. The house that Freddy built, yep. So they think, great, we're going to make 4 or 5 mask movies.
Okay. Okay.
It's just going to be this thing. We can always have a new mask. We can cast whoever. Bam. Money in the bank. And yet, it seems to have just sort of been kicked along for a couple of years with that idea. And when Charles Russell, who used to go by Chuck Russell, was finally pegged as the director, he got the idea at some point to make it into what it ended up being, which was this screwball, comedic, romantic film. Okay. Which is a big departure from the source material. Yeah. Why did that happen? It seems like Jim Carrey might have been a factor. Okay. So I found an interview from 2016 with Charles Russell where he said, Jim Carrey was my biggest inspiration. I just said to the studio, we have to get this guy Jim Carrey for the role and make this a comedy. At this point, New Line thought I was off my rocker and I didn't hear back from them about a year. When they eventually got back to me, they said, tell me how this story about a guy, a girl and a dog in a nightclub will work. So then I completely changed the script and adapted it into a comedy rather than horror. Said, fortunately for me, Bob Shane, the founder of New Line, allowed me to do something very different and original at the time. Yeah. Russell was apparently a fan of Jim Carrey, not just from Living Colour, but from when he was doing gigs at the Comedy Store, doing stand-up. Yeah. He said, I was almost unable to believe my eyes at what he could do with physical comedy and at his level of literally ingenious energy. I began to watch In Living Colour after I saw him at the Comedy Store and I said, there's this guy Jim Carrey we need to cast and we need to make it a comedy. So it does seem strange how you go from, this horror-esque, quite violent revenge fantasy to what we end up getting. And maybe Jim Carrey is the linchpin. Certainly it's kind of hard to imagine a mask movie without Jim Carrey. Or is it? Because we almost got Nicolas Cage.
Did we? 89? You mean in 94?
No, 94. Yeah, we 94. Almost got Nicolas Cage in 1994. So that quote I mentioned earlier from Charles Russell, he said, my list for the mask included Nicolas Cage and Matthew Broderick. There were a couple of other people considered, like Robin Williams as well was another one. Can you imagine Robin Williams in this role? He said, but really, we wrote it for Jim Carrey. When Jim read it, he said to me, my God, it's like it's written for me. And I said, it is. The list had Jim at the top and the other guys. I had bumped into Nicolas Cage backstage at a Jerry Lewis concert.
Okay. Jerry Lewis should have been on this list.
Yeah, I want to get back to that. And I just thought he could do it. At that point in the career, he could also have done it. I love that Russell mentioned Jerry Lewis here, because if the Mask comic was Freddy Krueger, then the Mask film is Nutty Professor. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Good point. Yeah. I mentioned earlier that Jim Carrey was for a while the highest paid actor in the world. Yes. So on the back of this film, we talked about his 1994 run. Yeah. Where he made three amazing movies, like 3 enormously successful movies: Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. After this, he became the first ever actor to be paid $20 million per film. Yeah. Which is just astonishing. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the effects before. Why are the effects good? Again, you read these interviews and they say they put Jim Carrey at the centre again. So first of all, because he was cheap now, Ace Ventura, although it was released before The Mask, was actually being filmed at the same time. Right, yeah. So Jim Carrey was still costing peanuts. Yep. He was just some comedian that nobody knew. You knew, but the average moviegoer in 1994 didn't. So they were able to spend the money they didn't spend on him on effects. Also, New Line seemed to have said, we don't have a big name. How are we going to promote this film? Here, have this extra money for effects, and we'll promote it as an effects film. And Ross is like, fine. Okay. And the other reason, of course, is because Jim Carrey is practically a living special effect himself. So they built the effects on top of his performance. Right. And I think that's a big part of why it holds up so well today. So, quote from Russell, one of the reasons that New Line was willing to up the budget to hire Industrial Light and Magic was because they thought they had no star to hang their hat on. It was great for me. I got the best possible effects house because New Line thought they had no star.
Huh. They
kept saying, how are we going to sell this movie? And I kept saying, Jim Carrey, he's got this huge following from television, including Kumar. You may not have said that. He's hysterical. Yeah, so, yeah. He's very happy with that.
Okay.
Sequels?
Yeah.
As I said, there was supposed to be a sequel at the time, actually. There was, you read press from 1994 and they're talking about Jim Carrey being signed up for a sequel for $7 million, $10 million. But there doesn't seem to be a consensus on precisely why no Jim Carrey sequel eventuated. But the answer seems to be that Jim Carrey just got too expensive.
Yeah. That's why the Dumb and Dumber sequel didn't happen for
many years until Jim Carrey became affordable again.
Yeah.
Another reason, but why not Cameron Diaz? Again, Cameron Diaz seems to have been keen. There was talk about what this sequel might have looked like. It might have been set at Christmas.
Okay.
It might have, brought Milo the dog back.
Okay.
Might have had Jim Carrey in green makeup again.
Okay.
Is this sounding familiar?
Okay, yeah.
Another reason why it didn't happen, because The Grinch came out.
Right.
Also, famously, during the filming of The Grinch, Jim Carrey had a very bad time.
Yes.
He found the makeup unendurable.
Yeah.
Got an infection, apparently. And, and then you come up to him and say, hey, Jim Carrey, you want to do The Mask Part 2? Sit in that fucking makeup chair for 4 hours. No, he's like, no, I don't have to do this. I'm Jim Carrey. So that's why we only get Son of the Mask, which apparently is a big pile of crap. People ask Mike Richardson every now and again, are we getting Mask sequels? And he always says, yeah, maybe. We're talking about getting Jim Carrey back. We're talking about getting a female lead. I'll believe it when I see it.
It's all Hellboy movies all the way down, I think, at this stage.
Yeah. Shall we do our votes?
Yeah. Okay. So the comic is a yay for me, especially Mask Returns. I liked it when the gangster subplots came in and when Doug Mank's art really started to develop. I think they're fun, unpredictable. Haven't read a lot of the later ones, but we might if we do Son of the Mask. But it's just a simple yay, I guess.
For me, it's an A.
Okay.
I just don't think there's a lot going on in there that I particularly enjoy. It seems a bit humorless, crass, kind of unfunny, and dull. I often found myself skipping over the procedural stuff and not being particularly interested in it. And the art, especially in the second series, Mask Returns, was certainly improving and I liked it. I liked the character of Walter.
Yeah.
But mostly I found these people unlikable and I was uninterested in their travails, so it's a no for me.
Okay. The movie?
For me, it's a yay. I think this movie is very funny.
Yep.
I was often laughing as I was watching it. I think it's well put together. I like that we have appropriate foreshadowing. I like that we have good characterization. It's not long, hour 30 minutes, and like 10 minutes of credits.
Yeah.
So, I just sit through a lot of credits to get that Dark Horse reference.
Yeah.
And yet I know exactly who everyone is. I get a really clear sense. We know exactly who Stan is in 5 minutes of storytelling. I know who Cameron Diaz is. I know who Dorian is. I know who Nico is. The only person who I don't know who it is Peggy, and that's because the film deliberately obscured it from me to make that betrayal real. I think the effects hold up excellently. And of course, Jim Carrey's performance is really, really good.
Yeah. I agree on all those points. It wasn't as funny as I remembered it being.
Well, you're not 15 years old anymore.
No. I did think it was funny in 94, but I do remember being a little bit like, it wasn't as funny as Ace Ventura, was my feeling at the time. When my brother's girlfriend asked me, what'd you think of the movie? And I said, I thought it was
And you haven't changed your mind. I admire
that. I haven't changed my mind. I actually felt... I could feel the age of it a little bit, the something about the cinematography or whatever we've been trying to figure out about it.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
What
makes this film a 90s film?
I don't know. Is
it because it's mostly at night? Is it because
maybe
as we said, the gangsters feel really 90s?
It's part of the cinematography. Like I said, it reminded
Steel was mostly at night too.
And it reminded me of Steel. It reminded me of The Crow, and it reminded me of Dick Tracy and Adam Sandler. All those movies.
I kind of feel like Dick Tracy's kind of in a league of its own, but certainly it feels like The Crow and Steel. I think with the nighttime aesthetic, with the well-dressed gangsters and their ties with corporate ties.
Yeah, there's I don't know what it is. There's something about the cinematography.
You watch a film in the
that-
last 20 years with criminals, and they're always wearing street jeans.
Yeah.
And here, like, they're always really sharply dressed in dark colours, and they always hang out in a big cavernous warehouse space.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a really identifiable aesthetic.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that makes it 90s?
I don't know exactly.
Casual sexism?
Yeah. Maybe it's even the ages of Jim Carrey.
The presence of Jim
Diaz.
Carrey as a young man and Cameron Diaz
Jim Carrey is maybe even that is... I don't know. But anyway, I rate it a little bit less, but that's not to say it's a nay at all. It's a yay. It's a really good picture.
All right, what about adaptation?
I'm going to go nay because of the change in tone. I think to go from it's like going from a mystery to a horror movie last week. Here we're going from a horror to a comedy. That's, if you'd come in there as a fan of the comic and got to a movie where nobody gets killed and he's shooting over people's heads, I would be like, that's not what we came here for. We came here for a violent cartoon, a violent living cartoon.
I admire your consistency. For me, it's the exact opposite.
Okay.
I think this is one of the better adaptations that we've had on the podcast. And this is partly because I'm not super impressed with the comic.
Right.
But to me, the change from Death Note from being a kind of thriller, an academic thriller about the logical challenge between two masterminds, and then to take that and turn it into a kind of horror, a banal horror, a trope-riddled horror film, to me was creative sterility.
Right.
To take a horror comic with minor elements of comedy and turn it into essentially a romantic comedy, to me feels like the opposite. That to me feels like you need to take an enormous creative leap to think that that a blood-soaked revenge fantasy could be about the success of a stifled romantic and a humorous romantic story. For me, for that to even occur to you, you need to be dreaming big. You need to be imagining something. You need to be taking a material, and for me, it elevates it, it transforms it, and improves it. It's so funny, and it wouldn't have been half as good if Jim Carrey was trying to play some kind of sinister character instead of this.
No, I agree with that. I mean, the movie's good, but as an adaptation of what that comic is, I think it's not what the comic is.
I think, of course it's not what the comic is. Of course it's not. But I feel, as I've made clear on this podcast in previous weeks, that I think the best adaptations are the ones that do something new.
Yeah.
That take the material and transform it and make it something wonderful and new thereby. And I feel like that's very much what's been achieved here. Okay. Whereas last week, say, they didn't make something new and exciting from that. They took what was a brilliant story. I mean, it was Death Note that did something new. By taking these hoary tropes, you find magic object grants all your wishes. Oh, it didn't grant all your wishes, now you're sad. That's not what Death Note's about.
Right.
But that's pretty much, very much what comic book The Mask is about. But it's not what The Mask film is about.
Right.
So for me, big yay. Okay. I thought this is one of the best adaptations we've had.
Okay.
And I'll invoke Chris Warner at this point.
Okay.
As you said, artist and editor at Dark Horse.
He's now senior books editor.
He said, the movie as a comedy was a big hit, and I'm not sure that the substantially darker and more violent approach of the comics would have travelled as well.
Yep.
I firmly believe that movies and the source material, comics, are really two different things. In fact, why try to just repeat what's in the comics? Alright, please like, rate, review, and subscribe.
Yes.
Kumar. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Send us a DM or an email. Send a snail mail letter to Kumar's address, which I'll provide to anyone that DMs the Twitter. No, I won't do that really, because in fact, Comic Book Movie Oblivion is changing its headquarters in the near future.
Yes, that's right.
At the moment, I'm surrounded by Kumar's possessions in a state of disarray as we're preparing to shift premises. So please join us next week from our new location.
Yes, and please Don't forget our Patreon.
Don't forget our Patreon.
Which is patreon.com/comicbookmovieoblivion. The link is in the show notes.
Kumar's got to pay his increased rent.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
No, I mean, we would never use our Patreon money for daily expenses.
Yeah. Okay, next week we will do Annie.
This is nuts. I can't wait to do Annie.
Yeah, so it'll be our 100th episode. It's the 100th anniversary of Annie. Is there any other preface that I need to give? It's 1980, I think.
Depends which one we're doing, because there's a number.
We are doing there have been a bunch. We'll talk about that next.
Oh boy, will we talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So see you then.